Welcome to the WanderLearn Show. I'm your host, Tapon. This is one of my 3 episodes featuring Alex Hutchinson. He is the author of a brand new book that just came out in 2025 called The Explorer's Gene. He wrote a best-selling book about endurance called Endurance. This book explores the topic of whether or not there is a gene that pushes us to explore and all the implications around exploring. So episode 1 talks about whether or not there's a gene. Episode number 2 talks about how technology has impacted our desire to explore. It also touches on the question of whether exploration is required to have a fulfilling life. Episode number 3 is about exercising your explorer muscle. Exploring versus exploiting. And exploiting is, by the way, not a bad term in this context. And finally, we revisit the question about whether exploration and the desire for exploration is in our DNA. Alex is a fascinating, profound individual. I appreciated his book, and I hope you appreciate this podcast with him. What would you tell somebody if they're stuck in a routine? What kind of practical strategies would you kind of recommend for incorporating more exploration in their daily life based on what you found in your book, which is called The Explorer's Gene?
Yeah, I guess step 0 is just sort of be conscious of the idea that it's worth taking some chances. It's worth stepping off the beaten path, even though that often means accepting the risk of failure and the chance that things might get difficult. So step 1 is just be aware of this, that this is beneficial. How do you actually enact this in life? It's tricky. One of the tips that one of the people I spoke to gave is zooming out is a powerful way. We tend to live very narrowly in the moment, and so we're thinking, what are the immediate consequences of this action? What if should I keep exploiting what I know with a known outcome, or should I explore in this way where I don't know what's going to happen? And that's very unnerving. If you're able to zoom out to think about the bigger context, both in the context and also the time frame. If you think about a year from now, looking back on this moment, what am I more likely to be proud of or to regret? And as soon as you do that, most people then tend to have a bias more towards trying the new thing, taking the risk. You're like, a year from now, I'll be glad that I got on the roller coaster or whatever it was. Even if 5 minutes from now, I'll be screaming. And so I think in the context of making decisions or taking chances, if you're able to zoom out and think about the bigger picture, not how will I feel in 5 minutes, but how will I remember this, that can be one way of triggering it.
That's a really good practical advice, Alex. Your first book was about endurance, and you are an exemplary figure in this. I can't remember. I think your personal record is definitely under 3 hours.
I've run a marathon in 2:44. I was more of a miler, a middle distance runner.
Yeah. Okay. And you're so you do a 1 mile. Your fastest mile was?
The metric version of the mile, 1500. If you convert that to a mile, it's just over 4 minutes by hundredths of a second, which I will regret for the rest of my life.
Right. But I mean, amazing. And so your first book was a big hit, all about endurance. Your new book is more about exploration. Is there anything that you learned in writing your new book about the Explorer Gene that either contradicts or at least challenges in some ways whatever you learned from writing about endurance?
I think so. I think there's a lot of connections between the two topics.
Sure.
I think my views on exploration were really informed by my experience, by both my experiences as a runner and then my experiences as a journalist writing about the science of human limits. So I think, for example, one of the scientists I spoke to for the Explore book framed it as, why do people do hard things? Why do people run marathons, for example? Because we're not born knowing what our capacities are. We're not born knowing where our limits are. So taking on a challenge like running a marathon is a form of exploration, trying to discover what our own limits are. So to me, running has always felt like a form of exploration. Mm-hmm. Now, in terms of what might have changed or what might have contradicted, I would say I set out on this project imagining that the book would end up with a title along the line, or a subtitle along the lines of "The Case for Why We Should Explore More," or why you need more exploring in your life. And I think researching the book, I ended up with a more nuanced or maybe more balanced take that exploring is important, but if you were to say the opposite of exploring is exploiting, which is how it's sometimes framed, you're either exploiting what you know or exploring what you don't know.
Mm.
That exploiting is also important too. Like when I kept asking the scientists I interviewed, like what, so like, especially as we get older, where we tend to explore less, like how do we make ourselves explore more? And the answer they often gave was, well, it's not necessarily that you always need to explore more. The goal of exploring is to discover things that give you pleasure. And if you're always moving on to the next thing before you've had a chance to enjoy what you discovered, it's like with the music example, which we talked about earlier. If you're like, I really want to keep discovering new music, but you never listen to the same album twice. You discover new music, but you never actually sit down and put it on and say, yeah, this was the best music I discovered last year, and I'm going to spend an hour listening to it. Then the exploring becomes a little more hollow. So I guess what I'm saying is, I've it gave me a more appreciation for like, yeah, sometimes it's you want to take the time to enjoy what you've discovered in your explorations.
I'm always going for the best sorry, the newest restaurant, the different restaurant, not the best restaurant, but just always trying to go new. And if I go to the same restaurant, I'll order a different thing on the menu. Basically, I almost never repeat. It's terrible, but I do listen to songs more than once.
That's
But
good.
so at least I'm not completely incorrigible. But um, people like me that tend to pursue novelty to an extreme, probably you would say, hey, maybe you should kind of exploit a little bit more and just kind of revisit old haunts and that kind of stuff.
I would be cautious about telling people how to live, but like depending on your wiring, that may be what makes you happiest. But I would say, give it some thought that rather than reflexively thinking newer is always better, and I think about this when I read books too, because there's an infinite number
Right.
of books in the world,
Right.
and there's very little reason to reread books because there's so many great ones. But I
Yep.
sometimes reread books because there's books that have had a meaning in my life, uh, and that when I reread them, that meaning amplifies. I get more out of them the second time, and so I make a space in my life for that sort of revisiting. So it's worth asking sometimes. I think, should I order the dish that was so good the last time because it was so good? Um, and maybe the answer is no, but I think it's worth keeping. That's what I kind of came away with, is that it's not always a failure if you're crawling back into the comfort of something you loved before.
Revisiting the topic of nature versus nurture and the explorer gene, looking at your own children, for example, I know it's just one data point, or I guess two data points. Um, but have you kind of sided a little bit more on the conclusion? I imagine that one of your children is far more, has that explorer gene much more than the other, even if they both have it. Maybe they both have that tendency to chase novelty, but one of them just does it even more than the other. What have you concluded?
I've definitely been surprised at I've never had kids before, and so I would say I was surprised at how different my kids are. And of course, you can't. It's impossible to disentangle whether the younger child is different from the older child in reaction to the older child or in reaction to
Right.
how. So it's there's a lot of confounding variables, but I think some of it is clearly they're just wired differently, and I don't want to call my kids out too publicly. One of them is definitely more at this point in her life more exploratory than the other one, but there's we'll see. And I think for me, it was when I was 15 that I went on my first like wilderness trip. It was not something I grew up with, and when I and until that moment, I don't know that I would have realized how much I was going to love it. But some friends wanted to go on a canoe trip, and I went with them, and I realized, and I don't think there's been a year since that I haven't gone on a pretty serious backcountry trip. So it may be that for either one of my kids, they will find the thing that prompts them to want to explore. And I think at some point, whether it's next year or 10 years from now, and I think in a sense that is the best argument for exploring in the broadest sense, is that you will never know the thing that makes you happiest unless you encounter it. And if you don't explore enough, there may be things that you will really love that you will never encounter if you just stay on the straight and narrow.
Very good point. Hey, I loved your book, Alex. Let's wrap it up and with a question more, I guess, not so much about adventure and outdoorsy stuff, which is most of what my audience cares about, but something about other ways to exercising that muscle, that explorer muscle. And maybe one way is like changing careers or any other things that you could think of that say, hey, this is another way in case you're just not an outdoorsy type person. Here are other ways to kind of uh, tickle that side of you that in case especially for the person who has a tendency to have a lot of fear and just doesn't want to kind of push the envelope at all. What would you say to them?
So I think one of the coolest things you can do. So I'm 49 years old, and I'll say, as this in this, let's call it generously middle age, in this part of my life, um, one of the most powerful feelings is trying something new, learning something that I'm not good at. Because by the time I was 30, I kind of knew the stuff I was good at, and I was good at the stuff I was good at, and so it would have been easy to spend the rest of my life doing only the things that I knew I was good at. But I was lucky enough to stumble into someone convinced me to try rock climbing. In my, I guess it was when I was around 40, and I was terrible at it, and I'm still terrible at it, 10 years later. Um, but it was it was such an eye-opening experience to be in that realm of beginner again.
Right.
And I'd be lying if I said I don't still feel self-conscious about it when I go to a rock climbing gym and I'm like, man, these 8-year-olds can do all this stuff, and I'm still here, but can't even tell I'm colorblind, so I don't even know where I'm going on the wall. So it's not all puppies and rainbows learning new things. Like it's just like when we were kids, learning new things is hard, but so valuable and empowering, and just such a reminder that there's so many more things to learn, and it doesn't have to be something physical or something challenging. It can be a hobby of some sort, and so I would encourage everyone to make sure that with each passing decade there's something in their lives that's new that wasn't there in the previous decade.
Excellent advice and an excellent book. I really congratulate you for writing your second book, and I think this is going to be a hit. It's called The Explorer's Gene. Alex Hutchinson is the author, and I really appreciate your time. And send people to which website, where should they go to find out more about you and to follow you on social media, things like that?
Yeah, probably the best one is alexhutchinson.net. It's got links to books and to social media and stuff. So I couldn't get the .com. Some 11-year-old in New Jersey got it, but alexhutchinson.net.
Okay, great. And that ends this episode of the WanderLearn podcast, where we explore travel, technology, and transformation. If you'd like to see the show notes with links to what we've talked about, go to wanderlearn.com and click on this episode. If you'd like to connect with me, just remember Tapon. That's my first initial and my last name. Tapon is always my social media username. My website is ftapon.com. Do you want to leave me an anonymous voicemail where you can make a comment or ask a question? Then go to speakpipe.com/ftapon. Furthermore, if you'd like to get rewarded for supporting my projects, then go to patreon.com/ftapon. That's where you can pick up some remarkable rewards for as little as $2 a month. Now, 5 quick favors. Number 1, subscribe to the WanderLearn podcast. 2, download it. 3, share it. 4, review it. And 5, sign up for my newsletter at wanderlearn.com. Our theme music was composed by Eric Stratman. This is Francis Tapon, encouraging you to wander and learn.